the culture of the place that they are, the culture of their leadership, and the culture of the people who inhabit the church and make up the church. But like I said, I've been in this denomination since I was a little person. For the longest time, I thought we were the only Christians because we were the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and then there were Methodists, and then there were Baptists. I was probably 17 before I figured out that like we were not the only Christians. My grandmother's grandfather started the church that eventually became the church that I grew up in. Wow. So just a long history. It was a second Christian church, and like a lot of our denominations, the second something means that it was the church that the African Americans started because they weren't allowed to join the first, right? And so that's part of my heritage. But there's also an interesting twist in the road that comes from my father's side. My father is part of an African syncretism, faith practice and faith community called the Osset Society. It has its origins in ancient Egyptian cosmology. So if you ever heard of Isis and Osiris, that same kind of thing. It's a monotheistic religion, but also brings in Eastern Chinese medicine and some Confucian wisdom. And it's just sort of, it's a syncretism. It's an amalgamation of several faith practices put together. And the way that my dad and at least 3 of his sisters found their way there was that they were turned off by the Baptist church that their mother and father were a part of. And they were turned off because they went to this Baptist church in a small town. And because it's a small town, people have opinions on who you marry. And members of the church wanted my grandfather, is that right? Yeah, my grandfather to have married someone else. I don't know who this someone else is, but he chose my grandmother instead. That disappointed them. And in turn, they shunned her. Wow. She loved God. She was a devout Christian. And she went to church all the time, but they made it so unpleasant for her that she eventually stopped going to church, but she did not leave the faith. And of their 8 children, about 4 of them went into the Osset Society, and about 4 of them went into non-traditional Christianity. And so that was their sort of way of working through that. And so I ended up on the side with my dad and in this non-traditional society. And my parents divorced when I was very young. And so I visited my father in these faith communities, which were communal living, communal stores and groceries, and communal schools. So it's a very self-contained community. And so I was Christian for most of the weeks of the year, but about 6 to 8 weeks of every year, I was a member of the Osset Society. So that's my fun.
How did you negotiate those 2 realities? Those are all encompassing ways of seeing the world.
Very much so. And they are opposed in many ways. They're not necessarily complementary. So they have monotheism in common, but the folks who are a part of Osset Society often left because of church hurt. And so there's this sort of antagonism towards the church, not its core values, but the way they're lived out by actual human Christians. But in that, they also challenge some of the ancient stories those ancient biblical stories that we tell. So I grew up having to answer for why, if Moses and all these people crossed the Red Sea, there was not a trail of broken pottery and tools and things that would have showed that that path actually existed. So, and I'm 8 years old. I can't answer that question. So it was an interesting way to grow up. But I will say now, as an adult, I appreciate just the emotional turmoil that led them into that faith community. But I also appreciate the presence of grace, forgiveness, community, care, justice. That's a part of that faith community's practice as well. And even though I didn't choose it for myself as an adult, I still sort of respect it as a community, and it continues to inform the way that I live out the fullness of my spirituality, even as an ordained Christian minister. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like you have a really deep appreciation for it. Was there a moment, I mean, was there a time like in high school or in college or something where you're like, okay, I am like choosing this particular way, or was it more of a gradual journey, or?
There was never a moment where I felt like I had to choose between Christianity and the Austere Society. Christianity just had the major advantage. I was in the Christian life most of the year, and my predominant parent was a Christian. So it was never going to be a fair fight, so to speak. However, I did have a moment where I had to choose Christianity actively and not just be born into it. And as I've said, I was born into generations of this same church. And so I did in college have a moment of like, is this me, or am I just falling into a pattern that was handed to me by my family? And it was in those moments in college, singing in the gospel choir, going to church because I wanted to and not because I had to, that I sort of searched my way through. Yeah, I'm choosing this faith. I'm actively choosing this faith. And it was probably a year later that I got my call to ministry. And so it was an interesting journey. And not long from then, around that same time, actually, I gained some better insight on the faith community, the Austere Society, the community my dad was a part of. I knew I hadn't chosen it. It wasn't going to be my life. But the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship people that I was hanging out with in college were trying to convince me I needed to convert my dad. And I worked hard on that for a little while. But so my moment of awakening was actually to stop doing that. I went to one of their religious rituals with him as a way of being present with him and showing him that I cared about what he cared about, but also like, hey, Dad, you need to turn your life over.
Yeah, low key.
So you should get your soul saved. But I was at the ritual, and my dad had actually been put out of the community for divorcing his second wife, my stepmother. And he was coming back. And I didn't realize all this was happening when I showed up. I just thought we were doing a thing, doing a regular thing. I was going to a ritual with him. But it was a moment where he offered himself forward, admitted mistakes he had made, and asked for forgiveness and to be received back into the community. And there was this moment of sort of grace and forgiveness and absolution where he was received. And I just recognized God in that.
Wow.
And I decided to stop bothering him. I said, you are where you are. The Lord is working with you and with these people. And so I got to make my decision. You get to make your decision. But really just being able to recognize, oh, okay, this is a God moment as well. It doesn't have to happen in the context I'm used to.
I love that so much. One of the books that I read a long time ago was like a missiology like book, and it was Christianity Rediscovered, and it was about some of the missionaries who went to try to like evangelize to the Messiah, and at the more and more time they spent with the Messiah, they also realized, oh, these are stories and these are truths and these are experiences that they have had deep within them, and they have carried with them, not just as individuals, but as a community far before we ever got here. And actually they understand God in a much deeper and more interconnected way than we do. So I really love that story. So tell me about how some of your childhood experiences and this faith journey that you were on led you to MICAH, and then also tell us for those folks who may not have ever heard of MICAH, or like, is it MICAH or MICAH? Tell us what MICAH is and why it is the place where you are able to live out the things that the prophet Isaiah calls us to do.
Sure. So how did my journey lead me to MICAH? Is an interesting question. I always thought I would live out my spirituality through social work or something of the sort, right? I'd be a helper in the community, and I would do that because I love Jesus, and that was the way I wanted to manifest my faith. And then I got a
master's in social work, right?
Yeah, I have a master's in social work. That's true. That wasn't said before. I have a master's in social work. And so on my way there, faith-based social work and faith-based social service was a big thing in sort of the social and governmental world. And so I just figured I would land there. And then I got my call to ministry. But as you pointed out, I still got my master's in social work and I got a master in divinity. I got an MDiv. And it was because in my conversations with God, AKA negotiations, I really didn't, I still felt called to social work. I still felt called to be with people who were affected by the broken systems in our country, whether those broken systems were welfare, sort of the traditional capitalist economy, whether it was the way that racism has infected all the systems that we live among. So I was aware of that, and I still wanted to fight those battles. I still wanted to engage in that work. And I felt called to ministry. And so over time, that has evolved into different ways of manifesting. So I've been the community life director at a seminary. I've been a program director at a community organization that taught young people how to organize. So I've just had all these different kind of work experiences, some of them at the same time, because I was also a pastor. I was a new church planter. And as some of you know, that's not the best paying job right out of the gate. So I had multiple jobs at once. So I was all through my career, I've always been a clergy person and a social worker at the same time. When I discovered community organizing, I lived in Chicago. And as I said, I worked at an organization that was teaching young people how to do community organizing. And I watched 16-year-olds shut down the juvenile detention center in Chicago through their activism, protest, action, organizing, and was just floored by their agency, by their clarity on the issue, by their power and the way that they enacted that power with no job, no ability to vote, like, no, all these things that we sort of associate with traditional power, no position, no role. And yet they were still able to make such a huge impact on the system that the ripples are still being felt today. And that really stayed with me. And so an opportunity arose in Chicago for me to be part of a clergy caucus for a community organizing group. And I joined them and was doing that about the time I met my husband in Chicago, married him, and we decided to move to Memphis. So when I moved to Memphis, I was looking for something similar, some other kind of clergy caucus, some sort of faith-based community organizing. And MICAH hadn't been born yet. And so somehow I got the invitation to the first MICAH meeting, which was called together by our sister organization in Nashville that wanted to see if there were people in Memphis interested in doing this work. And so they called about 12 people together. And somehow I was on that list of people. And we started meeting in October of 2016 and incorporated it as MICAH, Memphis Interfaith Coalition for Action and Hope, in May of 2017, May or June. If you're paying attention to the timing, that yes was around the time of Trump's election. It was also around the time of Trayvon Martin and still doing some recovery work from Michael Brown and some of those police shootings of unarmed Black men and women, and trying to survive that time. And a lot of clergy were trying to figure out, how do I act in this time? Who do I need to be? And I was part of that. Who do I need to be? How do I need to be right now? And so I was very much drawn to MICAH. Went to that first meeting and stuck around. We do often get confused with MICAH, but somehow I feel that's appropriate. For one, MICAH is a partner organization of MICAH. MICAH is made up of partner organizations. We have 62 of them, and MICAH is one of them. But also MICAH started after the assassination of Dr. King in trying to find racial equality and equity in our society. And we are taking up that torch. Even as they continue to run, they've, sort of taken a different direction in terms of the service they provide, but their heart is still in that place. And we get the chance to carry on their heart's work. And so I'm proud to be confused with MICAH. um, there are people in the city who still think I work for MICAH, but it is MICAH. And so that's the work we're involved in now. And so we're really trying to focus on equity work. In other words, creating a society where everybody has an equal chance at the outcome they desire for themselves, right? So that everybody gets the chance to thrive. And we work on that in economic equity, educational equity, and immigration and intercultural equity. And I can unpack those if we need to.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if, and it may end up unpacking one of those like pillars, but tell me about a time in your work, and I'm sure it happens so often, but if you can tell me about a story where you saw the face of God, where you saw the image of God alive in someone else, and it felt, that you knew God's presence was there in a different way. We always say where there two or three are gathered,
Yeah,
God is there, but there are some times that are a little different. So.
No, you're right. And you're right. I see it a lot in this work, and it's hard to isolate a story, even though you told me to do so beforehand. But
and it doesn't happen necessarily
keeps circulating for me as well.
Within your life too,
Yeah, and this one in particular, so there's two things I can share. One is related to MICAH, but it's not around a particular issue. It's around leaders. So in MICAH, we don't have volunteers, we have leaders. And the meaning of that for us is that part of this work is both creating a society that's more equitable for everyone, but it's also reminding individual humans, individual heartbeats, that they have the power to make that change happen. They have the power to bring that society about, right? The kingdom of God is within you, or it's within your reach. So that sense of that you don't have to keep dreaming about a better world and just hoping we get there someday. Like, you can be an agent in helping to pull that day forward. And so that's part of the sort of underlying work of MICAH. And I have the privilege of watching people who show up to their first MICAH meeting and they are just present. They don't know what task force to join. They don't know what they're going to do. They don't really know why they're there. They just want to do something. And maybe they start out volunteering to create a sign-up sheet, or manage an email list, or copy flyers at their job or something. And then 2, 3, 4 months later, they're sitting in front of the county commission testifying to why we need better public transit for everyone, right? Like, those are the moments that I get to see all the time. And it's a blessing, because I feel like I'm seeing people awaken to their own power and agency. It's always been there. I didn't give it to them. All we're doing is creating a space where they can go, oh, I don't have to wait for somebody else. I can do that. I can ask for that. I can stand up for that. I can speak out for that. And that's just the beauty of MICAH. I would say the other part is it's a lot more personal. So my apologies for those who didn't think we were going there tonight. But I'm pregnant.
I like that.
I have a lot of babies. Yes, I have a baby in here. I'm due in June. And this is my second anticipated baby. So I have a 3-year-old at home who miraculously is not making enough noise to be heard right now. And I have this one on the way, but this is my 5th pregnancy. And so for me, that journey has included multiple miscarriages. And that was not a thing that I anticipated in my journey of life. It wasn't so much that I hadn't heard of it happening. It just did not occur to me as a stop on my faith journey that something like that could happen. I had thought about, what if a parent died? I had thought about, what if I lost the love of my life? I just hadn't thought about this. And so when it came about, when I had my first loss, my first pregnancy loss, it hit me like a ton of bricks, and it hit my faith hard. And I wasn't sure I was going to be able to hold on to it. I wasn't, and at that point I was already ordained clergy person. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to hold on to my faith. It was a hard place to be. And people just that came out of the woodwork, and the face of God just emerged in all these unexpected places. Um, Older women at church who maybe I had revealed something in a prayer request, and they picked up on it and came to me later and was like, my daughter had 7 miscarriages, but now she's has a healthy baby at home. Just walking me through. Um, a, a support group, a fertility support group, was literally created in the midst of my journey, in the midst of my losses. A support group specifically for women of color sprung up out of Chicago. And then as I was in the middle of one of my pregnancies, they started a Memphis and Mid-South chapter. I mean, so God just continued to show up. And I was not looking for God. I was not speaking to God. I was not trying to get our relationship in order. God just kept pressing. And it's that sense of when God is looking, the way that God comes looking for us, right? There's a lot, and even in Lent especially, there's a lot about looking for God and searching for God and trying to get closer to God. But there are some times of grace when God comes looking for us and just comes and gets us from the edge of wherever we are. And I that is where, I've really seen the face of God, not once, not twice, but 12, 13, 20 times, even just in this one little issue, the way God has continued to pull me back. And so the faith that I have now is different than the faith I started out with. It's different than the faith the University Christian Fellowship tried to give me, but it's even different than the faith my mom and dad tried to give me, right? This is a faith now that can take a hit. This is a faith that even if I'm totally knocked off my rocker by a tragedy or a trauma, I have now an understanding of a God that is doing everything God can not to let me fall. And so that's what I'm sort of living in terms of encounters with God. I'm just thankful.
Yeah, thanks for keeping it superficial and easy. No, thank you for your vulnerability and your courage to share with us, because I think those are stories a lot of us need to hear, and there are stories that we resonate with, but we are afraid to tell one another. And so there is certainly power in voicing that. I wonder, after coming out of a time like that, where you kind of had your center, your focus was all over the place or was always changing, and where you said you weren't looking for God, you were kind of on the edges, on the margins. And we just talked about this in worship the other day, about how God is always going to the margins. God is always going to the edge. And so that's in some ways where we should show up. But have you kind of out of that season, are there any practices or rituals, spiritual or not, that you have developed to help keep you in that space of attentiveness?
That's good. One is what just happened, which is that I talk about the things that have happened to me. I'm a private person as a general rule, but I have been moved of late to tell the story around my own pregnancy loss issues more and more, because those people telling me those stories saved my life and saved my faith. And so I don't know who I'm helping when I tell the story sometimes, but if I'm prodded to tell it, I try and gather up my little courage, put my big girl pants on and tell it, because I know the saving power of a story and a testimony and a moment of encounter like that. So when I have the chance to do it, I try and tell it. So that's a spiritual practice for me that is a little bit weird because it's not contemplative. It's very outward facing.
But it's good. It's also a practice we see throughout scripture, though, too, right? I mean, that is.
Yeah. Tell the story. Tell the story. And so that's definitely part of it. The other thing is a line out of Renita Weems' book. You know Renita Weems, Dr. Weems? She's a Hebrew Bible scholar, but she's also been a college president and she's an itinerant Methodist minister. And she has written a book called Listening for God, A Minister's Journey Through Doubt and Silence. I was given this book 20 years ago, but I came back to it in the midst of it all. And one of the lines was, if you can't pray, say your prayers. And that's been a good spiritual discipline as well. Like sometimes you don't feel like it. You guys out there that have already been prayed, and you can recycle them and give them back to God until you find your own words again. And I think about that a lot. My grandmother was that kind of person. She prayed the Psalms. Sometimes when she was with people who were suffering and she didn't know what to say, or even if she thought she might know what to say, she thought the Psalms would probably say it better. She would just read them Psalm 46 or Psalm 42. And so that's been a meaningful reminder to me. My prayer life is not still back where I want it to be, and it's not back where it was. But the reminder to say my prayers has been a powerful call to reconnect and to keep coming back to that spiritual practice of prayer.
I love that. It's particularly appropriate for us for right now during this time when we're not having face-to-face gatherings. We are having daily prayer services every morning at 10 a.m. And Cumberland Presbyterians typically don't pray for long periods of time. And we don't do church services every day either. So this is very different for us, but it has been so, at least for me, calming and comforting. And there's some type of peace that is present and grows in that space when we're together and we can start off our day, or at least the first part of our day, together like that. So that resonates with me. Before I open it up for questions from other folks, and if you have questions, you can start typing them, or you can in the comments space, or you can hold them and wait to ask them. But please, if you have something in mind, please start typing it out now. But what should I have asked you? What didn't I ask you that I should have asked you?
Well, I'll tell you what I thought you were going to ask me that I didn't have an answer for, which is, are you fasting for Lent? Or have you given anything up? And the answer is no. And mostly that's because as a pregnant person, I'm loath to tell myself I can't eat something. So I'm just eating all the things I want to eat. But more seriously, I was talking to somebody recently about how Lent is meant to signify the wilderness. And this virus outbreak, this plague, if you will, is its own wilderness. And so I'm trying to let that teach us, let that speak to me, let God speak to us through that experience as its own real-time Lenten wilderness. So I'm sort of living with that right now.
That's the question I should have asked you, is how are you? How are you feeling?
Yeah. How am I doing? I'm okay. I haven't left the house since Friday. But just trying to take it one day at a time, really. Trying to be sensitive to what folks are going through in different walks of life. Trying to be sensitive to what I'm going through in this body, trying to house to the world. And take care of myself as best I know how, while still being sensitive to the needs of others. It's only going okay. But I'm taking it all as sort of as much of a sacred experience as I can.
Yeah, I like that. just to try to see all things as sacred and see like the Jesuit mantra of God in all things. We have a question from the not the old pastor, but the former pastor at the church where I pastor now, which is fun to have him here. He says, how do churches become a part of MICAH, and what does it mean to be a part of this organization?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. How do churches become a part of MICAH? There is a little bit of give and take in being part of MICAH. And so what tends to happen is that we start with a conversation to find out if you're interested in what we do, and if it is in line with who you understand yourself to be in the world. Generally speaking, people find us because it's appropriate, and we do have that alignment. But it's for people who are seeking justice and who believe that their faith and the call of the divine compels them to respond in a way that may or may not include direct service, but is absolutely about addressing those larger systemic issues that create the need for direct service. And so we're trying to get at those big picture issues. Is our school system working the way it should? Do we have the public transportation that we need? Is our law enforcement system functioning as justly as it can? And so those are, if you're compelled by those questions, then we need to be in conversation. At that point, what we try and do is connect you to our larger network of congregations and institutions that are doing this work together. But also we want to amplify whatever justice work you're doing in your individual organizations. And that's the give and take. And so we say we want to amplify whatever good justice work you're doing. And also we are calling you into this larger work that we're doing as MICAH together. Is that helpful? There is a form, there's a partnership form and an agreement that we sign, kind of like an MOU. There are dues that are involved that are appropriate on a sliding scale to whatever your budget, your institution's budget is. And all that can be worked out as part of the logistics. But it is really sort of a meeting of the mind and heart, and then coming together in a written agreement.
When you say, are those the questions that interest you? It's funny because it seems like those are the questions that the prophets are always asking and saying should interest us. And if not, then we should have a different conversation about how we live life together. That's just my 2 cents. Do others have questions? They can be personal. If that's okay, they can be personal or about spiritual practices, about ministry, about MICAH. Don't resist from asking a question. I know somebody has a question. Just being willing to ask. Can you tell us about some of the partners that you have?
Mm-hmm. So MICAH is one of our partners. And let me start from the beginning by saying that MICAH doesn't have any individual members. It only has organizational members. And the thinking behind that is that we're trying to organize the already organized. There are a lot of ways out there for individuals to get involved in this justice work, but our work is patterned on the thought, what if we organized our existing institutions to go above and beyond what they can do on their own? And so, for example, Constance Abbey is one of our partners. It is an Episcopal mission, I think, that sits outside of St. Mary's Episcopal Cathedral. But it's not an offshoot of St. Mary's per se. It's part of a larger Episcopal piece. And it's a residential mission where 6 or so folks live there and do service to the poor out of their life there. Well, now in the midst of this viral outbreak and the closing of Room in the Inn, they're doing triple, 4 times the amount of service they would normally do. So as a part of MICAH, they don't have to feel like they're out there by themselves, right? So we've been talking today. They've sent us a list of supplies that they need and the cause and that they're trying to work toward, so that we can help amplify their cause and reach out for things on their behalf. At the same time, they notice first when warming centers aren't, outside the virus, aren't able to meet the actual need out there in the street. And so then we start to get into conversations about what part of the system is broken that we can't meet that need. Well, one of them is that the temperature cutoff, or the temperature maximum for when a warming center is open, we think is too low. So now we can start working on a systemic issue together that would be harder for them to do on their own because they are 6 people. But now with MICAH, they can be 62 organizations, almost 30,000 people strong, to push on that issue, right? And that's part of our function. So Constance Abbey is a partner, but also Hope Church is a partner, which has thousands of members. New Direction also has thousands of members, is a partner. Freedom's Chapel is a partner, and they have 50 members. Juice Orange Mound is a partner, and they're not a faith institution at all. They're a neighborhood-based institution, but they share those values of justice and equity and human dignity. And so we're able to do good work together. So we have a nice constellation of nonprofits, different faith communities, Unitarian, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and that we've had a smattering of others sort of in and out. It is mostly the Abrahamic traditions that are represented among the faith community, but it's not exclusively. So it's a nice group.
And I think like taking that warming centers example, that's like really helpful to highlight what is there. So there was not a question, but Bethany Murphy says, no questions, but wanted to thank you for sharing your painful experience and how sharing can help others. I can't tell you how many times I've told my son's story, medically complicated child, or someone has told their child's story, and it makes everyone feel so much less alone. We can't stop talking. It either helps someone going through something similar or it reinforces compassion in general. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Amen to that.
I wonder if you could share with us, there are 2 things, I think, to close us out. One, we've been asking folks, is there a tradition of their community, like a prayer, a chant, a mantra that you either start or close meetings or gatherings with that you could share with us to close us out? But before that, my last question would be, what is MICAH's greatest need, or what's the ask?
Sure. The call I was just on before I got on here, and the reason I was late, is because my several of our key leaders had to put their heads together on a video conference to figure out where do we go from here. We had a large fundraiser planned for April 20th, and we're obviously not going to do that now. But what do we do? How do we move forward? We were going to do an action. We're going to sit in on a court hearing related to the consent decree, but court has been canceled, right? So even all our action work is being disrupted, if you will, as we try and adjust to this new reality. But one of the things that came out of our conversation was that all the people who were vulnerable before, who were marginalized before, who were silenced before, are even more deeply affected now. And how do we stand in solidarity with them? And so we're thinking through some issues right now. What would it mean for us to speak up against any ICE arrest right now? People are stuck in their homes. It makes them very easy to find. People need to get out to get medical care, and they're afraid to do so because of ICE. Couldn't we just, during this crisis, put a moratorium on ICE arrests, raids, deportations, that kind of thing? Thinking in the same way about evictions, credit card defaults, rent non-payment? Can we put a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions and credit reporting right now while people are trying to get their finances secured? So those are the kind of pieces that we're looking at right now. Oh, even testing. For those of you who have kids in school, it's testing season. And those statewide tests theoretically still have to be done. But what would it mean for us to not do them? That's not unprecedented. And this is a season of both high stress and low capacity. And so even if we found a way to issue the tests online or virtually to the children, would it even be fair for them? I'm looking at my notes because I had to remember what we talked about. Would their scores even be valid under this level of stress? So those are the kinds of things we're looking at right now. In addition to the other issues that we're working on, like public transportation, there's only one testing site so far in Shelby County for the virus. How are you going to get there when public transportation's average ride is 90 minutes to 2 hours? And then you have to take the test in your car. You can't walk up. So what if you don't have a vehicle? So these are the questions that we're wrestling with right now and the work that we're trying to get done in this season. And what we need is just people who are attentive to those needs, people who care about those things, to stand with us, to speak out with us, to support the work financially if standing up and speaking out is not in their capacity right now. Whatever that may look like for us, however you can support the work, we invite you to do so. And any way that you support us supports our partners. We can also direct you directly to partners if there's something specific you want to do, like what MICAH is doing right now with their emergency care, like what Constance Abbey is doing with their shelter and showers and emergency food. So there's a lot of ways to be helpful right now. Eventually, we'll figure out a way to redo the fundraiser and try and make up that loss, but that's not our priority right now. Right now, the crisis has created its own sub-crises that are within our values and our lane, as I like to call it, for us to do as MICAH. And so however folks can support that work, we would love to have you. And I didn't say this before, I should have. We do have a website. It's www.micahmemphis.org. And on there, you can find out a little bit more about our work. And you can also join our newsletter, which is a great first step to having your organization join MICAH.
Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you for bringing all of those points that you just brought up. Those are things that sometimes, well, most of the time we don't think about all of those situations that you just brought up. And thank you for being there and in tune to try to help solve those situations. It's a different time for all of us. And thank you for thinking of those things.
Thank you, Pat, for being receptive and open and hearing them. I obviously don't come up with these things by myself. We have amazing leaders in our midst who are just tuned in to the needs of our communities. And I'm thankful that we can put our heads together at a time like this and try and figure out where our energy is best spent.
And I want to say good luck on your new baby coming. I can resonate
Thank
with
you.
I went through 4 miscarriages and an ectopic pregnancy before I got my one that I got. And she's 43 years old now, so.
Oh, praise God. That's awesome. Well, that's encouraging on 2 fronts, because I need this 3-year-old I have thinks she's 43 now.
Sorry, my echo was trying to play something. It heard you, either you or Pat, and tried to start playing some music for us to go out on. Thank you so much. I think that at a time like this, the one response is to become so much more insular and to look like, oh, how do we take care of our own, instead of what we are always called to do is how do we care for the folks who are most vulnerable among us? How do we care for the orphan, the stranger, the widow, whoever is suffering? How do we continue to live out this witness that we see throughout the biblical narrative? So I think you were the perfect person to be joining us for the first time virtually instead of in person and during this season.
Thank you for having me. Just for hearing our stories and MICAH's story. I appreciate it.
And Linda McGroom said you were doing awesome work. Thank you for caring so much about people and children. Do you have a way that you could take us out of this time together?
All right. So this never goes well when you sing on a virtual meeting, but that is what we do. And so oftentimes it's funny because I don't usually start or end meetings this way. I do this song when everybody's talking amongst themselves and I need to get everybody's attention. So I just sing the Amen song. It works for multiple faiths, and it's only one word, and that's Amen. And is it okay if I sing it, Peggy?
Yes, it's great. We will be muted, so we may be singing along with you, but we'll be muted so we don't create a mess with the sound here, though.
Okay, understood. So I thank you for having me. Everybody say amen. 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 Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. And I'm going to stop recording.